This is SWTN.
My name is Sunni Boehme.
I've been a life coach for 30 years, and I've written 3 books, and this is going to give me the opportunity to give you a little bit of insight into the 3 books that I've written.
Diary of a Turkish Wedding is a book that I just published, and it is about my experience living in Turkish villages, very provincial Turkish villages, on the eastern side of Turkey.
I had some very unique experiences and opportunities that most Americans would never have, where I actually spent time living in very small, very provincial villages in the eastern part of Turkey, which tends to be very fundamentalist Muslim. And I felt very compelled to write this book. Number one, I felt like I was in villages that were still 200 years behind us. The water didn't always run, and we had to get water from wells and carry it to the house sometimes. Not every place had electricity. A lot of the people still use donkey carts or oxen carts, and they lived off what they could raise in their backyard.
I feel like I was a pioneer for a while, and most Americans would never pay money to go on trips like I did. But I felt like it was a fabulous opportunity to truly experience life in totally another culture. And I came away with a great appreciation for the Turkish people, for their tenacity, for their fierce passion, and they welcomed me. They treated me like a queen. It was a fabulous experience in emotional connection, even though I didn't speak any of their language, and not one woman in the village that I went to could speak any English.
There were only a couple of men who could speak English, and in the Turkish culture in these areas, the men are always someplace else. The women and the children are together all day, and the men go off and do their things. So I thought it was a fascinating opportunity to have an experience with some place that nobody ever gets to go. So if you're an armchair adventurer and would like to really have an experience in a Muslim culture and to find out that the deepest teachings of Islam are so beautiful and everything that any of us would want. And unfortunately, what we see are the things that we have great resistance to because the way it's being lived out appears to be very controlling. And that is not the way it was taught. Like many of the other religions, the real issue was love and peace and community and supporting each other. And that I did see and experience with these people, is how if somebody had sunflowers in their backyard and the sunflowers were ripe, everybody on the street got to have sunflowers. And if somebody had an apricot tree and that was ripe, everybody on the street got to have apricots. And these villages were sometimes only 12 homes or 22 homes. The reason I got to do that was because I did marry a Turkish man. And so that's how I got into these unusual situations.
About how long ago was this?
This was within the last 10 years.
I also got to spend time in Istanbul and all the places that we hear about and know about and the fabulous traveling experiences. But to really live in these villages is quite an experience.
Did you do a lot of touring around there, or did you just stay in the village?
Well, on one particular trip we stayed mostly in the village because his brother was getting married, and so it was all about planning the wedding, procuring all the food, because all of the food was cooked at home. There weren't caterers that you could call, and unbeknownst to me, because I'm the one that was providing the money for this wedding, I was supposed to pick out the wedding dress for the girl. I had never seen the girl. Nobody even had a tape measure in her village that could measure her and tell me what size she was. And I was supposed to pick out her dress, buy her a trousseau, and all of her makeup. And this girl was 3 hours away from us, and the boy had never had a conversation with the girl. I mean, these were truly provincial, traditional lifestyles that I got to see.
And what happened is the next morning, this girl who had never met or had a conversation with the boy or his mother, the next morning she moves into the mother's house and she becomes the slave to the mother. And that is exactly what happened. I was there, I was sleeping in that house, and the next morning this girl was serving coffee to all of us and making breakfast. And I was completely astonished. There was no honeymoon, there was no getting to know you. She just automatically became the slave. So it gave me a huge appreciation for living in America, for being born an American, and a huge appreciation for the Turkish people and the difficulties that they still have to live under, that we have no comprehension how good we have it in our lives. Because I was staying in homes where it would make people who live on welfare here look like millionaires.
The most amazing thing was that it seemed like nobody felt poor. They were so rich in community and in sharing and giving and supporting each other, and they never ever were comparing themselves to each other. There was never living up to the Joneses, and that was really refreshing to watch this part of their village experience.
How big of a village was the one that you were living in?
22 homes.
That was 22 homes.
Yeah, and there were only as far as I could see, there were only 4 or 5 cars in that village. And so if a family wanted to go someplace, they would rent. There was one person in the village who had a 9-passenger van, and so 17 to 22 people would pour into a 9-passenger van. And I do have pictures in the back of 17 and 22 people in the van. Now, granted, many of them were children. And so there were 2 and 3 children stacked on people's laps. But that was another fascinating experience. I came home to Milwaukee to my duplex, and I felt like I walked into a palace. And my own car. I was never so thrilled to have my very own car that I could put the windows up and down whenever I wanted.
How was the climate?
The climate is very much like the climate in Wisconsin. There are areas that are very cold. There are areas that are more desert, more hot. The villages that I stayed in, there were no trees. It was mostly a type of desert that doesn't even grow scrub brush. It wasn't like the Sahara Desert, but there wasn't real dirt any place, unless they brought it in from someplace. And the people lived in houses that were built out of straw and mud. So they kind of looked like they were stucco, but it would be straw bales that were stacked upon top of each other, and then they would take this mud and finish off the top that looked like stucco.
The first book that I wrote is Mirror, Mirror. And this book started with me having a terrible car accident that created an out-of-body experience.
And the experience was, oh, I could have been dead, and I've never been to Europe. When I came back into my body, and it changed everything about my life. I suddenly became so fearful of living in mediocrity and never seeing the world. I was 30 years old, and there was this, when you face near death, you suddenly decide that, hey, wait a minute, there's some things that I want to do before I die besides work and pay my bills. And so this adventure is about me selling everything I had or giving it away. I sold my house, and I was already living in my dream house. I really did have a very good life, but it was still in a box. It's still, I was performing and behaving in the ways that everybody expected me to be. I had been in the same religion all my life. I got a degree and did what I was told, and suddenly I just had to burst out of the box. And so I sold my house. I took the assets that I had from the house, which was $30,000, and I bought a one-way ticket to London. And the interesting thing is that I have been raised on a farm, and I was very conservative and quite a scaredy cat. I'd never been on a train in my life. I'd never been on a city bus in my life. And I'd only been on a plane once in my life. And here I bought a one-way ticket to London had no place reserved in advance to stay. This was 30 years ago. There weren't cell phones. I had to figure it all out in the moment. I didn't backpack. I had enough money to stay in bed and breakfast, sort of rent a room in someone's house. And I traveled Italy, Spain, Sweden, France, Israel, many different countries, and many places around the British Isles. And so each chapter is a different adventure in a different country. And the adventure of taking off and doing something that was terrifying, because the day I bought my one-way ticket to London, I broke out in hives all over my body. I was so terrified, and luckily I was with someone, a nurse, and I thought it was mosquito bites, and she looked at me and laughed, and she said, "Sunny, you have the hives. You're terrified." And so she took me home and showed me what Aveeno bath soak was to take away the itch and help me on my adventure.
I had fabulous experiences in Mallorca, Spain. I spent a couple of months in Sweden with some people that I met in Mallorca, Spain, and we were at the airport and chatting in line, waiting, and they said, "You know, you're really fun, and we want to practice our English some more, and we've got 2 more weeks of vacation. Would you come to Sweden and spend 2 weeks with us?" And so I ended up in Sweden, living in people's houses, having the most amazing experiences with people in each one of the different countries. And it's because I didn't go as a tourist. I went really wanting to know and to understand the culture and have experiences with the people. And it was a brilliant adventure, and it's lots of fun. I think you can see that I'm pretty light-spirited, and the truth is I'm very spiritual. And so the whole thing was also a spiritual journey of discovering me, discovering my purpose in the world. And at the very end of this book, I was, like I say, living in London, and I had run out of money, and I said, "Okay, God, where do you want me to be? What do you want me to do now?" You know, I understand why I had to take this adventure and totally get out of the box and experience the world, and I have now become a woman of the world. What do you want me to do? I want something that will reward humanity, that will use all of my gifts and talents in a way that's easy for me and keeps me thrilled with life and what I'm doing. And so that day I went out to lunch in London, and I was sitting at a table in a restaurant, and the people next to me were talking about being life coaches. And it was something I'd never heard of in the United States because it was a brand new thing. And this was in like 1986 when I was living in London. And I was vibrating. I just thought, "Oh my gosh, that sounds like something that would be wonderful to do."
And so I started talking to them. I stayed another year and a half and trained to be a life coach in the very first program that was doing life coaching, and I've been a life coach in the United States now for 30 years. And so this was that adventure. So if you like to get a tidbit of traveling in other countries and you'd like to crawl into my suitcase, believe me, you'll have a great time.
What started you on a path towards writing?
After this adventure, when I was a life coach and I was doing a lot of seminars, people would say, "Oh, Sunny, you have such great stories. Why don't you write a book? You should write a book. Oh my gosh, those are such wonderful stories." And but it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of intention to sit down and write a book. And at that time in my life, I wanted to go out dancing every single night for 4 hours instead of sitting down and writing a book. And then one day, 10 years ago, I said, "Okay, God, if you want me to write this book, make it easy for me.
I want somebody who can just coach me through this, help me through this, because I'm a coach, so of course I hire coaches to make it easier for me." And the next day I went to a meeting, and Kira Henschel stood up and said, I'm a book coach, and I can help you write your book." And in 4 months, this book was written and published, and she helped me every step of the way and made it easy for me.
So this book is primarily about using the power of your mind and the law of attraction to attract to you what you want. Because in every chapter, because I'm traveling alone with my journal, every morning I write down, what is it that I want today? What is it that I want to experience? Because I went from a life that actually I was pretty famous. I was very well known in the work that I did do, and
I left everything, and suddenly I was an aunt, on the street in London. So the adventure, so much of the adventure, is the journey to self-discovery and to recognizing the essence of my being and connecting with people in whole new ways. Instead of me walking in as the professional, it was like really just having a self-discovery experience and learning to use the laws of attraction. Because every day I would, like one time I wrote down that I wanted somebody to notice who I was and to give me a rose. And I was at a restaurant later on that day, and a man at another table sent a rose and a glass of wine over to me. Little things like that about learning how to use the law of attraction. And just like when I ended up in Sweden, I had been in Mallorca and realized that the people in the hotel next to me were all from Sweden. And the hotel I was staying in, it was all British people. And I thought, that morning I thought, gee, I could have taken this opportunity and met Scandinavian people. And then it didn't happen until I went to the airport and we're standing in line waiting to check our luggage in, and then I met these people from Sweden and ended up in Sweden. But I know totally that it was the law of attraction and me asking for something that I wanted, and that brought it to me. And every single chapter in this book shows the thought that created the situation that gave me the result that I asked for.
So there are two other books that I'm published in. One is Emotional Well-Being for Women, and this book, the Overcoming the Superwoman Syndrome.
And these books are a compilation of 20 different coaches, consultants, professionals in their fields, experts in their fields. And each one of us wrote a chapter in this book. This is my chapter on resolving conflict with grace and ease. Now, throughout my coaching career, I have often used the Course in Miracles as a basis for the things that I teach, and helping to coach people create lives that are contentment, peace, and joy. And whether I'm working with an individual on an emotional problem within their family, or whether I'm working with a corporate executive who's got some emotional difficulties with employees, this is a technique that I have taught thousands of people. And it's focusing on the result that you want to have. So if there's difficulties and dissension in the troops, be it in your home or with your friends or at the office, focusing on the end result, that there is only love between us. That's the end result that you want to have. So it's using the laws of attraction again to attract to you the result that you want. And there are a number of different techniques that in this chapter I share that are things that you can do to keep your mind focused on you staying centered and happy, so that you stay centered in love, centered and focused in the result that you want. Because when people are continuing to, he said, she said, this person's doing this to me, they continue to attract abuse, they continue to compound the emotional distress and difficulty within their own mind and also in their whole body. And that's why people get dis-ease, because their state of mind, this is happening at work, and this person said this, and this person did that, and being angry and distressed all the time and compounding it every time you instant replay it causes people's bodies to break down, for you to suffer from emotional distress. And so I'm teaching a technique that will bring order and harmony to every situation. But one person, at least one person, has to back off from continuing to instant replay the distress and stay centered, holding the space for love. There is only love between us. This will be resolved for the good of all. There is only love between us. This will be resolved for the good of all. And it works, and it happens. And I have seen miracle after miracle after miracle. So people can buy this book and get an entire chapter on all the different steps to doing this, like visualizing, like if it's a terrible situation at your work, you visualize blue lights, like you are walking into just a wave of blue lighting in your office, because blue tends to harmonize and balance and reduce the stress. So there's a number of different techniques in there that it empowers you to feel more powerful, like I can take some kind of action to keep me in a peaceful state of mind, and that will begin to create the wave. Because when a person says, I choose to stay in love and stay in peace of mind, then they can't attack, and you have to step away from the fear and the anger and the distress, and then you become a force for good.
All three of these are about, the reason that I took the time and the energy is about empowering people to know that they have different choices in every situation, that they can step out of the difficulty and the problem. Because anybody who's traveled internationally, some people have fabulous experiences, and some people will come back and say, oh, and our flight was delayed, and this happened, and they will instant replay every crisis and every drama. Now, those are the drama queens, and that's a lot of their identity is, oh my God, and then I lived through this, and then I lived through that. And they're usually not very peaceful, and they usually bring a lot of difficulties, stress, and crisis to every situation that they go to.
So all of these, every situation that I was faced, because believe me, it wasn't all a cakewalk traveling alone for 3 years in Europe. There were situations that were very scary, that could have ended up to be really disastrous situations, but I learned the power of calling in my angels, or stepping back and looking at it in a different way instead of getting stuck in the fear like, oh my God, he's going to attack me. There's this man following me down a dark street and I'm going to get attacked. I just know it. And, instead I shifted it, went to a higher place, and empowered myself. So every single one of these books are stories of empowerment. And I've been pretty fascinated. I thought that most of everything that I've written would really appeal to women. But what I'm hearing is that women buy the book, and then every night they're like reading it in bed, and their husbands say, turn off the light. What are you reading? Turn off the light. I want to go to sleep. And they're like, what is so interesting about that book? And they finish it in like 2 or 3 days. And then the husband reads the book. And the men love it just as much as the women, because the men love being right inside a woman's mind on journeys like this. And I've also, like the Diary of the Turkish Wedding book, I have testimonials and reviews from Turkish people who love the way that I handled the whole situation and the whole story, and that it was very respectful. And they liked it, that I'm really showing the Turkish people not as Muslims and something to be fearful of, but showing the really loving, open-hearted, kind side of the Muslim people that I experienced and love. And so it's a whole different experience than what you see on Fox News.
I love my life. I love my life primarily because I use the laws of attraction every day of my life. I've been a life coach for 30 years, and I help people put the laws of attraction into action in their lives. And that makes everybody happier, and the more people I can help get happier, the better the world will be.
I'm working on another book, kind of a leap off from this one. There's a book that I'm working on called Western Women / Eastern Men. And so any women out there who have stories, if you've fallen in love with a man from the Middle East or the Far East, and whether it was a good situation, a bad situation, a terrible situation, I will write your story for you. I want it to be a compilation of women's stories and how they handled it. Because I believe, and teachers, the teachers who've read this book have actually made lesson plans for their classroom. Teachers love this book, especially for 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, to help them to understand the difficulties when you decide to get involved with someone from a different culture. And so they've written lesson plans, and this book is being used in classrooms. And if you have a book group, I have a series of questions that are going to be written in the back of the book, discussion questions for your book group, because I'm getting a lot of women who are buying 6 books or 10 books at a time, and they love having the discussion questions right there. And if you're in the area, I would love to come to your book group and do a Meet the Author event.
I'm also writing another book about the laws of attraction in action called Hope in Action, and I'm going to be doing a series of seminars about each one of the laws of attraction and how to bring all the good into your life, how to help you to be a vortex of good. Well, okay.
This is SWTN.